Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Rseat is actually a brand new combination that we've never seen before. It's strange that there are only 3 cars available, but believe it or not, there's actually a meta and an anti-meta. Let's get into it. Your anti-meta car of the week is the GTR. Now, there are only 3 cars in this subdivision of the Group 2 class, the classic 2008 GT500 cars, but with that said, it seems that the GTR is actually the worst, automatically making it the anti-meta choice, considering the NSX and the Lexus are very comparable in pace. I managed to put this car in 46th position overall, making it the second fastest of the GTRs, and while the fastest one is a 0.6, I actually believe that this car can do a 0.4 or a 0.5 pretty easily. Despite the fact that all 3 cars are actually pretty comparable on pace, the GTR does seem to be slower than both of the others, but it is good enough that you can still battle with it, as I'm about to show you with the race that I did. The incredibly long straight of Fuji is a bit of a blessing and a curse. It's nice to have a bit of a relax when you're doing TT, but it can also make you forget where you are, so don't forget to look at the number boards. The 100 meter board is right about where the curb starts, and that is where you're going to brake. You'll notice I'm turning in just before the 50 meter board, and I'm actually going full brake pressure still. Gran Turismo's Magic ABS can help a lot with this. When you get down to first gear, that's when you want to start trail braking in. Use a little bit of that curb, but not too much, and then get back on that throttle in second gear. This car's very grippy, and strangely enough, every single time I got wheel spin was a little bit faster than when I was too slow on the throttle, so err on the side of more throttle there. Right before the 50 meter board is a little bit of an orange mark on the fence, and there's also this black tire mark right here. After the black tire mark and right before the orange mark is when you want to start braking and immediately turning in. Using only about 50% brake pressure, your goal is to get off the brakes as soon as you possibly can and get as close to that inside baller as you can. You also want to get on that throttle as early as possible because you can go all the way out here. As long as you're on the red and white part of the curb, you are going to be golden, but definitely be careful of the little divot in the curb. It can make you slide. For this long sweeper, as you can see, I've moved myself about a car width of the way outside from the inside, and right at this paved part of the track, that's when I start lifting off to get close to the first of 2 apexes. Gently lifting off the throttle while you add more steering can help you stay on the line without making your tires scream. That will ruin your tires in the race itself and also slow you down here. You can see that I'm fully off the throttle to hit that second apex that's right by that other paved portion, and even though I'm going wide here, it doesn't tend to ruin the next braking zone very much. Once again, the orange little thing, it might actually be red, but this thing right here on the fence is where you're going to brake, and you can see that I'm angled directly to the right side of the track. I want to have a really good entry, even though my angle of approach is kind of weird. I can still rotate the car and hit this apex. Right about the 50 meter board is when you're going to want to come off the brakes a little bit more and turn in second gear. Trying to hit only the red and white portion of the curb, you want to get back on that throttle as heavily as you can without sliding. And as you can see, I'm not at full throttle until I'm almost all the way to the curb. Speaking of the curb, you want to go straight towards it. The car's going to continue steering, and as long, again, as you stay on the red and white portion of the curb, you're going to be totally fine. For the next 2 little kinks right here, you don't need to go wide. You can just hug them, but set yourself up for this in a straight line and look for this change in color on the pavement. That is when you want to brake. I like to brake off the curb and then move onto it as I continue to brake. These tire marks that end right here on this little white line, that is when you want to turn in. Initially, you're going to be in second gear, but you're going to dip down to first quickly once you get all the way on the tarmac, and you want to get off the brakes as fast as you can. You can actually use more of the curb than I did right here. That cost me a little bit of time. When your car's stable, you want to squeeze as much full throttle as you possibly can. You'll notice that I'm pointed at the last Dunlop sign on the yellow wall in the distance, and I'm trying to make sure that I have enough room to start turning in. We're going to turn in at the beginning of this curb here on the left. After and not before you turn in, you want to lift. As you approach the curb, you're going to lift, upshift to second gear, and then get back on that throttle. Despite the fact that we're not aimed where we want to go, the car will continue to turn on throttle, and that means that you also have to be very careful on that throttle and your steering to make sure you don't oversteer. Looking just beyond the curb where the grass ends, that is when I want to start decelerating. I'm going to come off the throttle as I add steering. Then when the car decelerates a little bit more, I'm going to add a little bit of brake, then eventually come entirely off the brake, add a little bit more turn in, and all of those actions will allow my car to decelerate to get all the way up on the curb. If you decelerate too quickly like I did, you'll notice I'm adding a little bit of throttle. That is called maintenance throttle, and I'm not actually trying to accelerate just yet. I'm trying to keep my car on the line that I want. Here you want to be very brave. You'll see that I went all the way up on this curb, and I'm aiming for that yellow bit on the wall right there. It's very important you carry as much speed as you possibly can through here, and don't be afraid to abuse this curb. Wait until you come off that curb to then change the direction of the car, and then look to the inside for the ending of that curb. That is again when we're going to start that same deceleration process. We're going to lift off the throttle first, then we're going to gently add brakes as we add a little bit more steering coming off of them, and then downshift to second gear. Freeing up the front tires by lifting entirely off the brakes and then turning in will continue helping your car decelerate, and then be very patient as you get on that throttle, being careful again not to use too much of the curb. I was too heavy on the throttle and I oversteered there. That actually cost me probably an entire tenth, but we didn't lose too much momentum, so we continued. Track yourself all the way to the outside of the track and then look for this faint line that you see beyond the curb. It's at about that point, or actually right before it, that I'm going to start adding brakes. You'll notice I'm not all the way up against the curb just yet. That's because when I start braking, I am going to understeer. You need to plan for that. You want to get directly down to first gear as quickly as you can after adding about 50% throttle, then back up to second gear and be very gentle on that throttle. You can actually go straight up onto this outside curb and you don't have to worry too much about oversteer as long as you're not steering much. Please note the red dot that indicates my steering angle. Steer yourself back on the tarmac and then of course you're home free. I want to take this moment to mention that this is actually an incredibly challenging track, especially the final sector, so don't be worried if it takes you a while to master. Just try to take in as many of the details as you can. Gran Turismo's ABS is really interesting in the fact that you can actually start turning in for a lot of the corners and add a lot of steering before coming off the brakes at all. It does a lot of the work for you, but it doesn't do everything, so of course you still have to learn how to trail brake, and you still have to actually trail brake, but you can rely a lot on that ABS. One thing that seems to take a long time for people to notice is that when you come off the brakes and you continue adding steering, that act is part of trail braking. That actually continues decelerating your car, and it also frees up the front tires. When you're on this really long sweeper, if you steer a lot, you're going to just find understeer, and in the race itself, you're going to wear out your tires a lot. So you want to steer as little as you can, use the throttle to tuck yourself into the corners. For that left-hander that we just went by, the one that we just watched, it's really important to get on the throttle early and don't add too much steering. A lot of people wait until they're facing the way they want to go. You don't have to wait till you face the way you want to go to get on the throttle because the car will continue steering on throttle. This section is just incredibly difficult. I actually encourage you to watch this as many times as you need to really pick up all the little details. I feel like I learn something new about this section every single time I do it, and I've been driving this course for years. The elevation, the undulation, the curbs, the specific angles of every single corner, it's really technical. It's really difficult, and especially this last corner. This last corner has probably ruined more of the laps than any other corner on the track, and probably any other corner in any other track. This is a very difficult track, so be extra patient with yourself. Spend time watching, taking notes, and analyzing and adjusting. Like I mentioned in the intro, this race is actually completely different than anything we've ever had before. There have been instances of subdivisions of other classes, such as when Group 4 races are sometimes only front-wheel drive, only all-wheel drive, or when the Group 1 class is the old Group C cars. But this is the very first time that we've had only the 2008 GT500 cars in a Group 2 race. The bittersweet portion of that is that there are only 3 cars within this subdivision of the class. If you've been following the series for a while, then you probably know that I really like the Lexus. And the Lexus used to be the only one of the 2008 cars that could actually do anything against any of the other Group 2 cars. Now, since it's only these old cars, it is the fastest car. Well, actually, that's kind of debatable. I think some people are saying that the NSX is just as fast or faster. It does seem like they are both equally fast to me, but what does seem to be agreed upon is that the GTR is the worst, so naturally, it's our anti-meta car. Once again, this is the type of race where a pit stop is required, but changing tire compounds or changing tires at all is not required. I do, however, suggest changing tires. It doesn't take too long, and the time that you waste by changing tires is going to easily be made up by the pace that you're going to find in your second stint. On top of that, if you don't take tires, you're just going to risk spinning out. These cars are easy to spin out even when you have good tires, so I definitely suggest taking tires. Now, when to take tires is another question. You have a very good pit window here. I like to pit anywhere between lap 5 and 7, and I've heard people are pitting between lap 5 and 9. I think you could probably get away with pitting as early as lap 4, especially if you find yourself good with tires, or at least good with cars that are on worn tires. But I do think that the longer the stint, the worse off you're going to be, and the higher chance you're going to have of spinning. As always, you're probably going to find yourself in mixed skill lobbies. And what I mean by that is there are not always enough people to fill a lobby with people of the exact same skill level. So you've got to be really careful on braking zones and lines that people are taking. There are different lines that you can take for the final section especially, but when it comes to braking, I think that you'll find the faster people are braking a lot later, usually when they're actually staying on the line, and a lot of people are braking way too early, so be very careful when you're following people closely. On top of the fact that people are going to be braking early, these cars have incredible brakes, so you're going to find yourself crashing into people if you're too close and you're not ready for people braking early. Overtaking on the long straight can also be really difficult. If you find yourself behind someone who also has slipstream, if you move out of the slipstream, then you're probably going to lose out on the momentum. And of course, if you move out right when someone else moves out, you might end up running into him like I did with Black Rabbit. Luckily, it was early on enough, and I hit his rear bumper, so it ended up just being like a bump draft, which is, of course, also a really good idea when you're trying to pass people, if you can work with other people doing the bump draft. But what I'm saying, and what I've been saying, is just be really careful. Now, what you've just witnessed is my favorite pass to do on this track. A lot of people are going to go really wide, really early for this really long right-hander, and as long as you have 2 tires on the track, then you will stay clean, you'll have clean tires, and you won't have to worry about a penalty. Another thing to be cautious about is, you probably know this, but the skill gap is increased when it comes to high downforce cars. A lot of people do not know what they're doing with high downforce cars. Now, I don't know who this Drobo guy was, but I pretty much predicted exactly what was going to happen. He went for a dive, which he definitely had no business doing, and because he was on the inside and he was really narrowing his radius for the corner, he added throttle way too early, and it ended up making him spin out. Obviously, anyone can go for any kind of pass, but that was a bit of a dive, and he had no reason to believe that he was going to be able to do that, which is why he spun himself out and almost ruined the race for the other people. Be very careful with the overtakes, and be very careful with other people overtaking too. Don't do silly things if you're not really, really confident in your driving ability and your ability to control these cars. Another thing to be very wary about is the fact that after he went for that crazy dive and all those guys were trying so hard to jockey for position, it took an entire lap to actually catch up with the group that we were just behind before that. You've got to pick your battles. You don't want to just try to pass people because they're in front of you. If you find yourself in a position where you have to make a dive, especially early on in the race, you're probably just going to end up ruining your pace and losing the slipstream. And with this incredibly long front straight at Fuji, slipstream is incredibly important. If you don't have slipstream, but everyone in front of you does, you're probably never going to catch the back ahead unless everyone else battles terribly, which is probably the reason that you ended up losing that slipstream, but I digress. Be careful, be smart, think about the long game, and don't just pass people because you really feel like it. Pass people when you know you can and when it makes the best strategic sense. Also of note, when you are behind people for the entirety of the straight, you're going to be going a lot faster than you would if you didn't have that slipstream, so you do have to brake a little bit earlier. Jumping ahead a lap and a half, this actually perfectly encapsulates exactly why you don't want to battle unless you absolutely have to. Now, when I talk about choosing your battles, a lot of people, especially when I'm live streaming, will comment on the fact that, of course, this is racing, and that is what we're here for. And I've mentioned in my previous videos that, yes, of course, this is racing, but I guess it really depends on what your final goals are. If you want to just have that action, that corner by corner action, and just have these battles without thinking about what's going to happen with the rest of the race, then more power to you. But I really like winning, and I do like battling side by side, as you can see, but I like winning even more than that. So I'm going to go for the early pit here. When all 3 of them are continuing to battle and they're all staying on the track, I'm going to go in the pits because I know that I can undercut them. I'm pretty sure that my pace is faster anyways, but my pace on top of all 3 of them battling is definitely going to net me positions if I can maintain a very good quick outlap. Now, I included this like I sometimes do because I wanted you to see the pit entrance. You want to stay to the right of that line, but if you hit that wall, it actually doesn't really matter, so you can be really, really aggressive. And when it comes to the braking zone, brake before this final line right here, and you should be golden. Jumping into the very next lap, you can see that the undercut worked. Not only do I have fresher tires, so I'm going to have better pace overall, but I don't have to worry about battling and losing pace because of battling. So I was able to get ahead of our friend Plaka as well as the other person he was battling, but you might notice that Vigilante, who was also in the mix, is still ahead, and that's just because Vigilante didn't choose to pit just yet. Jumping ahead to the very next lap, you can see that not only did it work for that pack directly ahead of us, but the undercut was so powerful that we passed everyone except for 2 people. In first place, we have our friend Windfire, who is one of the most consistent World Tour drivers. He has been in the World Tour since I believe the very first, if not the second World Tour 6 or 7 years ago. And he still has that S on his screen name because he has been to a World Tour event recently. I'm saying all this because it has been very obvious since the beginning of the race that I was never going to catch Windfire, but our friend B Go Ahead is just close enough that I could potentially pull a move on him and get second place. I've actually completely forgotten to check if this has custom slipstream or the normal slipstream. I do believe it's custom slipstream because the dirty air isn't nearly as bad as it used to be, or as it usually is. With that said, the dirty air does still exist, so while you do get the benefit of the slipstream on the straight, through the corners, your car is going to handle slightly differently. It's going to understeer a little bit more. It's not going to have quite as fast cornering speed as you're used to, and even the braking is going to be a little bit different. So just be very careful when you're passing people or when you are battling people and chasing people like that. If you find that you have very aggressive people who are trying to make passes on the final corner right here, they're probably not thinking ahead at all, even a single corner, because this straight is so long, you're actually in a much better position if you're behind people. Of course, you want to be close behind them, but if you pass people before the straight, they're going to have slipstream the entire time, and they're most likely going to be able to pass you going into the next corner. Bigo did take the opportunity to get that slipstream, but it looks like he's not actually going to try to take advantage of having that slipstream and pull off a pass because he moved out of the slipstream. And of course, that benefits me quite a bit because that puts space between myself and Hellsfire, who is another World Tour driver, a guy that is actually in this game. And so it is up to me now for the next 4 laps or so to try to drive as good as I possibly can, considering the fact that I'm in the worst car, he's in the best car, and I don't know if I've ever beaten him. You know, I've beaten him before, but I don't know if I've ever beaten him with a worse car. He's a very, very fast, very clean, and very consistent driver. I really enjoy racing against Hellsfire, and this is just a bit of a shout out for him. He streams on YouTube. I am going to try to remember to put a link to his channel. I really, really enjoy racing him. You've probably seen me race against him many times if you've been watching the series or if you watch me stream. And yeah, this is just a big shout out to Hellsfire. He's a fantastic driver and a great dude. Now, I do think this was actually a very good battle. He had me sweating quite literally, and you can actually see it on my VOD. I actually encourage you, if you want to see this race, to check out my Twitch VOD. I did stream this live. It should be in my VODs for, I believe, the next 60 days. But since there wasn't actually a lot of action till the very end, it's not that great to break down. So I'm going to just break down this last lap. Now, you can see that he definitely has that slipstream. Like I said before, I'm going to move to the inside to make sure that he can't take the inside line. And that's not so I can track out on him. It's because I will have the advantage going into the corner. I essentially control the lines when I'm in front and on the inside. And that means I can also just make sure that I'm positioned for the next corner as well. Now, if he was able to keep up speed and get on that throttle cleanly, then he would have actually been in an advantageous position leading to that left-hander, but he did slip just a little bit, and I think that right there solidified the race for me. For this left-hander, I did consider trying to defend on the inside, but I also knew that he wasn't going to dive and do anything silly. The chances of him being able to pull off a really good pass there without slowing himself too much was pretty slim. So I felt that I was safe on the outside, and if he did go on the inside, then I would have more momentum. I'd be able to carry more speed through the corner. And so I did gamble on taking the normal line, and it did benefit me. I mean, I am struggling with with breaking this down today. I usually don't. I'll usually just re-record everything, but I think it's kind of funny to let you guys know how much I'm struggling with the video right now. A moment of reality. Now, when it comes to the final corner, if he takes that wide line like he did, he's going to be able to get on the throttle earlier than I could, and he could potentially use the slipstream plus the extra momentum to get in front. But I decided to take kind of a mid-line, which can be kind of confusing if you're following, and I am still able to get on that throttle. Now, I did slide my tires, but I think because we both had messed up tires by that time, it wasn't enough for me to slow down for him to get in front. Anyways, I'm all over the place right now. We're just going to finish it right here. Another shout out to Hellsfire. I really, really love racing against Hellsfire. I feel it's a privilege to be able to race against people like him in the daily races. You've probably seen lots and lots of different craziness. You've seen it in this race too, and you've probably experienced craziness in the lobby. So it is really, really beautiful to be able to share a really good race with someone, and I really enjoy. Like I've been saying, I really enjoy racing Hellsfire. Now, this does show that the GTR, in the right circumstance, with the right choices, can be an effective weapon against the two cars that I do consider the meta cars. It's not really an off meta considering all the cars are so close, but it is slow enough that it did justify me making an anti-meta video after it, and race B just wasn't an option. I refused to do 3 laps at Spa. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be making another one of these guides every single week. I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. I love every one of you. Thank you guys very much.